Chapter 4 Voices. People who claim to hear voices in their head in the beginning generally describe them as being subtle. At first, the voices come gently and almost a whisper, as if timidly requesting admission into the conscious mind. As the condition progresses, the voices become louder, more aggressive, and more demanding. I had been in the SHU, solitary confinement now, for well over a year when the first voice came, intrusive and without warning. I was in the exercise yard working out when the voice came, but unlike the subtle process described above, this strange voice came with the force of a battering ram, demanding to be heard. "Hey," the voice shouted. Caught by surprise, I stopped what I was doing, not sure whether I had actually heard the voice or if it had merely been a product of my wandering mind. I found myself holding my breath, astounded by what I had just heard, or thought I had heard. "Hey, hey," it came again, only this time it was more forceful than the first. The sound of this voice had a hollow tone to it, as if someone were trapped inside a giant glass jar, shouting for help through its open lid. A moment passed, and then there followed a series of whistling calls, like those used to summon a dog. I cocked my head to one side and focused on the screen mesh overhead, thinking the sounds may be coming from somewhere beyond the enclosed four walls. I remained perfectly still, anxiously waiting for them to come again, but nothing came, save for the sound of my heavy breathing. Shaking my head, I continued my daily workout, shrugging off the moment's experience as part of the SHU syndrome, if there is such a condition. I reasoned the voice had existed only in the canyons of my mind. In its lone desperate quest for companionship, perhaps the mind was creating its own Harvey, somewhat similar to Jimmy Stewart's classic imaginary rabbit companion and close confidant during his time in need. Yes, indeed, the isolation and solitary confinement gives you plenty to think about. This is why it is imperative that one keep his thoughts in check and in perspective, lest he fall victim to his own fallacy and begin to lose grip with his surroundings. Not a good thing. As I went about my routine, I allowed my mind to run freely. It's what I do to keep from focusing on one particular train of thought. It's not good becoming fixated on one's dire situation for long periods of time, as it only fosters anger, depression, and hatred. The three deadly killers that gnaw away at you bit by bit. Nor do I permit myself too much time to dwell on why my girlfriend's letters have become fewer and farther between. I try not to let my mind soar too far out into the free world, for the longing can, at times, become unbearable. When I think about my beloved child, I reserve those thoughts for moments when I whisper a prayer for her well-being before I surrender to slumber. Every day is a struggle to keep from suffocating in self-pity and defeat. It's the only effective weapon I have which to fight back. I write so that others may see through my writings, that through my writings some change will come about and my appeals for justice will be heard, that maybe the masses will hear my tiny voice screaming out from within this glass jar that I too have become trapped in. I write for peace of mind, and I write, and the voice returns. "Hey, you," it called. I was on the ground doing a set of push-ups when it came. The wall to my right side was approximately 5 feet from me. Then the whistle came. It seemed to be coming from a weather drain situated along the edge at the base of the back wall. An iron grill the size of a frisbee had been welded over it to catch whatever debris fell into the yard from overhead. As I crawled over to the drain and peered into its dark hollow, I was suddenly kicked in the face by a ghastly, pungent odor arising from within the iron grill. It was so bad I gagged. If you have ever gotten a whiff of a dead animal in its decomposition state, you know exactly what I've just described. "Hey," the voice came again, and yes, from inside the drain. Removing my t-shirt, I placed it over my nose and crept back over, leaned down over the grill covering, and returned the call. "Hey!" "Yo," the voice shouted back excitedly. "This is Double Life in A-Pod." It was someone from one of the adjoining pods in the unit opening a line of communication. "Who is this?" he asked. "H in F-Pod," I replied with the same enthusiasm. "Hold up for a second," I shouted again. I had to pull away from the nasty odor for a moment. This was the beginning of ongoing conversations with many other voices I would eventually come to know. It just so happened that the 6 yards in the unit were interconnected via a drain system which enabled us to communicate with one another. It would later become a crucial communication system for relaying the information pertinent to many legal challenges we would undertake throughout the coming years. This drainage system became the conduit to the prison grapevine and beyond. It also later served as a chat line for those needing to talk with someone, anyone willing to listen. This in itself was a comfort for many who had no one in the outside world. Double Life and I, like most of the other prisoners I came to know throughout the drainage system, would never come to know one another face to face. I must have had 3 conversations with Double Life before he became a victim of the Goon Squad and was moved to some other unit within the SHU complex. Double Life, as his moniker implies, had been sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. Having exhausted all of his appeals, he was destined to die in prison. After the many conversations I had with different prisoners from different pods in the unit, the smell of death that had initially risen from the drain dissipated. I figured the rain must have washed away whatever had died in there, a trapped rodent or perhaps an accumulation of rotting insects. Or maybe I simply got used to the stench, who knows? But one thing is for sure, I will never forget the haunting sound that arises from in the drain when no one is online. If you place your ear to the iron grill and listen really close, you will hear the tormented moaning sound of the dead, a mournful sound which seems to come from that charnel place in the netherworld. Stands to reason, for the world in which we live is but a step away from hell. It was here where I would also learn what had happened to Andres Romero. I wasn't to learn of Andre's fate for quite some time after we had gone our separate ways. I had often wondered what had become of him and Anthony Gouveia. The news came after several prisoners had been transferred to Pelican Bay from the Corcoran SHU. Andres Romero had been murdered, shot in the back of the head by a prison guard over a fist fight. The irony that it happened 1 week before his release. The grief that I felt for my little homie is the grief that a parent feels after the loss of a child. I think back sometimes of Andre's concern over the unjust conviction I was stuck in, the fact that I was being separated from my family for something I had not done. Then the thought of his own family having to experience such a loss 1 week before he was to be home. Prison life is so unpredictable and cruel. Like most of the prisoners there, Double Life had resented authority, in particular that of the Goon Squad, who he had a deep-rooted hate for. He confronted them at every opportunity. Perhaps he was on a suicide mission, his only way out of solitary confinement. My prayers are with him and with all those like him who choose death over a lifetime in the SHU. One of those others I came to know was a convict by the name of Jabrar Arnold. Chapter 5. Jamar Carlos Arnold. Like Joker from Redondo Beach, Jamar Arnold had violated many of the laws of man and commandments of God. Something else they had in common: the two were self-educated, articulate, well-read, and talented in the arts. Joker was a gifted artist. He could draw portraits, landscapes, or create his own fantasy world. Jabbar, on the other hand, loved literature. He had an admiration for the writings of Shakespeare, Plato, and Socrates. Jabbar also wrote poetry, an expression on how he viewed the world around him, a depiction of injustice and suffering, where justice and tragedy walked hand in hand. I think these two convicts would have been an asset to the world if only their upbringing had been more positive. But the demons that ate away at them through their lives would not permit it. Jamar reminded me of a Komodo dragon, strong, quick, and very deadly. He was one of the few who the Goon Squad would not dare physically extract from inside his cell. When forced to do so, the Gooners would first taser and pepper spray him. Like Joker, perhaps he too felt invincible at one point in his life, only to later find, as Joker had, to the contrary. During the criminal proceeding, he expressed how he knew and felt an evil within he had no control over, how it surfaced without warning, and how the world would be a better place without him living in it. But tough as he was, even Jamar was no match for the oppressive conditions as they exist in Pelican Bay SHU, and as a result of these conditions, he wrote a letter to a district attorney in Corpus Christi, Texas, admitting to the unsolved murder-robbery of Christina Sanchez, a jewelry store clerk. A murder-robbery in the state of Texas is a capital offense, and it was there where Jamar was subsequently tried and convicted. During the penalty phase, Jamar chose to address the jury by saying, "I am satisfied with the court's conduct and the representations of my attorneys." He went on to say that there are some people that aren't fit to live in society. I'm no longer fit to live because I can't live in a moral, law-abiding society. I think it would be a moral decision for you to make by sentencing me to die. I have taken a life, so therefore I deserve to have my own life forfeited. If it is not taken at this point, if you miss this opportunity, there's a good chance that I will kill again. That's just the way I am. True to his statement to the jury, in the presence of 12 other persons, he went on to kill another inmate on death row. Jamar stabbed Maurice Andrews numerous times with a sharpened bolt. He then picked Andrews up and slammed him horizontally into his knee, snapping his spine. In a final thrust of violence, Jamar stomped the sharpened bolt into Andre's brain. He then danced around the dead man's body in celebration. In a final statement the day of his execution, Jamar apologized to the Sanchez family, saying, "I'm deeply sorry for the loss of your loved one. I cannot explain and can't give answers. I can give you one thing, and I'm going to give that today. I give a life for a life. I pray you will have no ill will or animosity. You have the right to see this. I am glad you are here. All I can do is ask the Lord for forgiveness. I am not saying this to be facetious. I am giving my life. As for me, I am happy. That is why you see me smiling. I am glad I am leaving this world. I am going to a better place. I have made peace with God. I am born again." After Jamar had finished, he signaled for the warden to proceed with the execution. While the warden maneuvered the levers, releasing the lethal concoction, Jamar sang "Amazing Grace" to his last breath, executed January 7, 2002. Conditions in Pelican Bay's shoe had forced Jamar's final hand. I thought it important to mention Jamar as an example for all those out there who are under the foolish impression that going to prison is a rite of passage, a place that tempers a man's manhood and constitution. But know this, there are places within the walls where evil feeds off the flesh and spirit of even the toughest of men. Ask anyone who has ever done time in Pelican Bay State Prison how deathly quiet it is there. So much so that you can hear the beating of your heart and of static electricity coursing through the air like an evil spirit on the hunt for its next victim. The prisoners there seem to sense this. Maybe it's why they speak to one another in whispers. There will always be places like Pelican Bay State Prison hidden beneath the cloak of prison reform and equal justice. So beware of the choices you make and the paths that you choose to follow.